In this video, we will show you how to replace your front lower control arm on this Ford Fusion. This is part of your front steering and suspension located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Safely raise and support the front of the vehicle, we can start removing the wheel. To remove your wheel, you have 5 19mm lug nuts. We'll get those out of the way and we can remove this. Take hold of the wheel, remove it from the vehicle. Now that we have the wheel off, we can remove our 32mm axle nut from this area. With that removed, we'll continue with a hammer and punch directly in the center of the axle, separating this from the wheel bearing. Once you have movement from there, you can continue on. Now let's make our way down to where the control arm meets the knuckle. We have our ball joint here, and there's a pinch bolt holding the ball joint stud to that knuckle. We have to remove the pinch bolt and the mounting nut. The bolt head itself is a 15mm, and on the forward side, you'll have an 18mm mounting nut. A quick inspection of that. Continuing from here, you want to use some penetrant in between the slotted area of the knuckle on the ball joint stud. Next, we're going to separate this. You can use a small prying device in between the knuckle and the control arm, gently pulling down on the control arm, and then we'll have to carefully start pulling the knuckle away. If you find that you can't pull this down far enough to remove it from the knuckle, it's typically due to the forward bushing on the lower control arm. To cure this, we're going to remove our 21mm mounting bolt holding the control arm to the subframe. Next, we're going to shift the control arm out and away from the subframe. Just use a pry bar for this. Back over at the ball joint and the knuckle, we'll continue separating this. Under this area, let's dislodge our air deflector. This is held in place with a 10mm bolt. We'll follow this forward. We have another 10mm bolt. That should make it so we can flex this as necessary. Now we can start removing the rearward part of the control arm. What you will find is that the inner fender liner is in the way, so we'll be using a 7mm to remove these 2 bolts. At this point, everything along this area is separated. We can gently pull down on this. You don't have to fully remove the shield, but essentially we're going to remove these 2 18mm bolts. Let's start removing the control arm now. For this, if you find you have a hard time tugging it out of position, you could use a pry bar and gently start prying it. Just be extremely careful along your backing plate and the brakes on the outboard side here. Getting some movement. Flex things as necessary and we'll pull this right out of place. There it is, friend. Once you have your control arm out of the vehicle, we'll continue on with cleaning and inspecting the mounting area. We have this area of the subframe. Double check, make sure it's not rotted and weak. We also have this area of the subframe, which is also where the sway bar bushing and the sway bar bushing bracket is located. Let's give this a quick wipe. Now, as far as the rearward portion of the control arm, it's going to have to slide around the subframe, but underneath the sway bar bushing. The bushing itself is rubber, so we're just going to use a little bit of lubricant in this area to help us slide the control arm into the proper position. Now let's have a look underneath this area. We need to align our mounting bolt holes between the bracket for the control arm, the subframe, and we also have the sway bar bushing bracket up above. If you find it's not properly aligned, you could try using a small awl. You can move this around as necessary. We're only going to start in the mounting hardware for now. We'll do the same for the other. Now we can start reattaching the forward bushing on the control arm to the subframe. If it's not lined up, go ahead and use your awl. We'll get this aligned and start in the mounting bolt. Do not tighten this. We have our bolt with our blue thread locker. Move this around as necessary. We're going to start this in, but leave it loose. Let's gain focus on reattaching the ball joint to the steering knuckle. For this, we're going to take hold of the control arm. We'll carefully pull it down and slide everything into position. Now it's time for the pinch bolt, holding the ball joint stud to that knuckle. This comes through from the rear towards the front, and I like to use some blue thread locker. Start that mounting nut on there. Now before we tighten any of the hardware, let's make sure we apply upward support on the lower control arm, essentially bringing the suspension into ride height position. Let's start with the pinch bolt. We'll snug this up and torque it to 76 foot-pounds. Now let's make our way to the rearward mounting bolts. For these, we're going to snug them, of course, but the torque for them is 122 foot-pounds. Now let's move to the forward mounting bolt. For this, we're going to snug it and torque it to 159 foot-pounds. Go ahead and remove support from under your control arm. Let's get these other two bolts in here. It's time to reattach our lower shield. Let's press this into position. Start on our mounting bolt and snug it up. Let's continue rearward for our next mounting bolt. Now it's time to resecure the axle to the hub here. Get the nut on. When installing the nut, you'll find that it only turns so far before it starts turning this entire thing. The easiest way to tighten this is to use a pry bar diagonally across the studs all the way down to the ground, preventing this from turning on you. When you go to tighten this nut, never use an impact gun, only use hand tools. The torque for this is 148 foot-pounds. Now it's time to install our front wheel. We'll get this in place. Start on all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts. Once we have them bottomed out, get the wheel safely back on the ground and torque each of them to 100 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely back on the ground, we'll be torquing these in a crisscross manner to 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay, friend, we finished our installation. At this point, go ahead and take your vehicle for a road test down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. the only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.